When I heard the story of Jesus meeting the Canaanite woman, I thought, wow, Jesus was real. That convinced me. Like at that moment I heard it, I said, okay, you cannot fake that. Jesus was real. And here is the logic and why. So before I'm going to tell you how I read it, let me tell you what I asked you guys on Instagram. So here's the question I posed. A Canaanite woman begs Jesus to heal her daughter. Jesus refuses at first, saying his mission is only to Israel, and uses the line, "It isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She replies, "Yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table." Then Jesus helps her. So I asked, why do you think Jesus decided to help her? And I got a lot of different answers, basically going from to get rid of her as soon as possible, because he felt bad for her. That is a recurring thing. Because her faith was powerful and strong, so Jesus said, "You go, daughter is healed." To show that salvation comes from the Jews. Okay. Mercy, mercy, mercy. And somebody said dogs are also part of the family, which is a key. That's a good observation. I agree. And somebody asked, was Jesus a Jewish supremacist? Well, let's dive into it. And somebody said, although Jesus was based, he still decided to overcome his based prejudice just for a little bit. And I think Jesus was rejected from the table of Jacob. I don't know what it has to do with anything. All right. So I'm reading the version in Mark. This is what, made me decide to read it properly, because I thought, okay, where else does Jesus show how real he is? And yes, that made me read Mark, which is the first gospel that was written, not Matthew. I don't want to get to why I chose to focus on Mark after reading the two versions. But there is a story there. When I saw the two versions, I knew Matthew was not the original. Mark was. So I go to the OG. Here is the story. And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre in Sidon. And he entered the house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. At this point, Jesus was already famous, and I already did the due diligence of reading Mark to this point. So he also knew that he was gonna die. The reason he knew he was going to die is because John was already beheaded, and he did 1 + 1 and realized that he's next. Okay? He already knew here that he is in trouble. He didn't need anyone to come and tell him. Just knowing that John was beheaded was enough for him to know that he is also probably somewhere in the chopping line. But immediately a woman whose little girl was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. I do want to say what is this unclean spirit that comes and those demons that are being mentioned a lot. I will talk about that part as well, but I want to start with something more basic than that. I want to start to explain how Jews think and how it's being shown in the story. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed, and the demon was gone. Beautiful story, great story. But it's confusing. And here's the fun part. I wanted to see if Jews could understand the logic in that story. And they couldn't until I gave them a hint. And the hint was, think as a Jew. Put yourself in Jesus' shoes, and then give an answer. And when they did that, they were like, oh, that's easy. Yes, it is easy. Sometimes we need to understand the context. And I think Jews now tend to forget that Jesus is a Jew, which is very important if you want to understand the story. Here is what's actually happening. This is a logic and reason-based debate. Jesus actually looks for merit. He looks for people who have potential. Here is what it is. It's an exercise in Jewish reasoning and logic. If you guys want to know how I studied the New Testament, let me tell you that I'm using the best app in the market to do so. Bible Way. There is a link in the description below. You can use the code Rebecca to get a discount on annual membership to study the New Testament and the Old. All right, let's go back. Here is how Jewish reasoning and logic works. Somebody comes to you, presents a statement, an axiom. If you were a Gentile, if you were a Greek, then you would challenge the axiom when saying, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Then a Greek might ask, hey, is this statement true? And I'll be bold and say, more than trying to understand what that statement is actually, they would first immediately assign the logical rule of Israelites being children and Gentiles being dogs. And then they might choose to argue that Gentiles are not dogs. But that is not what the statement is. What it is a claim, right? It says, let the children be fed first. It doesn't say that the dogs doesn't deserve the food. It's just that you have an order of responsibility. First, the responsibility you have is for the children. Second responsibility is for the dogs, who are also members of your household, like Coping on Instagram said. What he did here, this is what Jews do a lot, and that is a volatility check to see if a person is volatile or not. They choose something that is teasing and a little bit politically incorrect to see if the person reacts to the insult or what they could perceive as an insult or to the logic itself. The second test in Jewish reasoning is to see if the person accepts your axioms. So the way Jews think is not, is it true? But if it is true, then. So what does the lady do? She says, yes, Lord. Yes, she accepts the axiom. She accepts what Jesus is saying to her and says, using his own logic, which he, by the way, he was fair because he gave her an opening to argue against him. He said the dogs that live in your house, only dogs who live in your house can eat out of the table, right? That means they're part of your household. The children are fed first. That means that you still have responsibility towards the dogs as well. But you are more obligated to taking care of your family, right? Of your own kin first. There is an order of responsibility in a household. And there is order of responsibility in our lives as well. First, you are responsible to yourself, then to your family, then to your nation, and so on and so forth. And she says, yes, Lord, it is true. There is an order of responsibility. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So she says, yeah, I don't see any Jews here. Seems like you have, there are crumbs to give away. So it's a teasing back. She's being sassy back. She shows some chutzpah. She doesn't fall into the insult trap, right? Because the claim is not really that goys are dogs. It's a test to see if somebody focuses on the logic or focuses on getting insulted. It's a volatility test. It's to see if the person in front of you is confident in their personality, in who they are. And so when they come to you and ask for help, they don't feel entitled, right? Because you don't have to help them. He doesn't have to help her. It's a choice for him to make. And because she is the one that needs help, she doesn't come out of place of entitlement. She knows she's a stranger to him. She accepts that. But just because she's a stranger doesn't mean she doesn't need help. And that is also a way to show gratitude for a person that could help you, and understanding that it's not to be taken for granted. It is a very Jewish way of thinking. Jews do it to each other all the time. And I'm going to give you a secret. If you ever want to get accepted, truly accepted to Jewish circles, this test is something that you're going to go through. And you're going to have people who look like they are hanging out with the Jewish circles, right? Working with Jewish donors, but they're never be accepted to the circle, really, unless they go through that test. Once you pass that test, you can actually be accepted to Jewish circles without going through conversion. That's a hack. It's literally a way that you can do it fast. You don't need to convert to Judaism. You need to answer like a Jew. And Jews do it all the time. They test you. They try first gently, right, to see if there is any chances that you'd pass. And if there is a chance that you'd pass, they would tease you like that, see if you get insulted, and see if you don't fall for it, and instead follow the logic and beat you at your own game. This way, that the way it was laid down, wasn't meant to shoo her away. It was meant to see if she finds the vulnerabilities in the statement that were put there on purpose. When you see, so the way you know that it was there on purpose is because Jews don't say more than what they have to. They don't give you more information than what's necessary. So it wouldn't say what she was wearing, right? It's not that kind of storytelling. It wouldn't say more words than needed, and yet let the children be fed first. Jews don't say words because they're cheap. They say exactly what's necessary. So when he says, let the children be fed first, it was an invitation. It was an opening. And she passed with flying colors by saying yes. But dogs are also members of the household. And that means you are also responsible, even if to a lesser degree, to also help us as a leader. And so he helped her. So when it comes to the actual demon and the way that was healed, so my understanding is that I've read Mark 2 now, and for most of the stories, except for one, which I immediately suspected was a later edition, and I checked, and it probably is a later edition. This is what happens when you know the culture. You know, like, okay, this doesn't make sense. I could tell like the two sentences that didn't make sense. It's like, I don't think it was there originally. It wasn't. So the thing is that in the first century, right, there wasn't a word or description to psychological situations, and people needed psychological help a lot of times. Jesus acted as a psychologist, and it's psychology coded, right? The paralysis was not out of physical injury, it was out of guilt, or shame, or like every person had a reason for why their emotional situation crippled them. And at least until chapter 7, right? Because I didn't finish reading through all the chapters like intently yet. So here, because I have an aunt who is a psychologist, to me what I noticed that is this woman had a little daughter. So like I said before, Hebrew is cheap. So why is it a little daughter? Because when it's young kids, usually the psychological issue is not with the kids, it's with the parent. So the parent needed guidance. The kid needed their parents to get guidance. So when it's a little daughter, most of the time, right, those who need guidance are the parents. So when she went back home without Jesus's need to go see the girl is because, and that is my guess, that's my speculation, it's because probably it was the mother that needed help, and then once she had opened up, she could go back home and help her daughter out of whatever situation she was at. That's my guess, and I think that that psychological case was remembered not for being a complex one, right? I don't think, it sounds to me that it was some kind of a minor dispute, and saying that he was on the way and she was only asking for crumbs, meaning she didn't need bread, she needed crumbs, she needed like a small advice. Then probably it was something like, hey, I have this issue with my daughter, and she gets very angry or something like that, or she's like wouldn't get out of bed when I ask her to, and then it's just a little bit of a tip. And I think the reason that this story was recorded is because of the exchange of her testing, because of the exchange of him testing her. Right, so this exchange where he tested her was actually to show his character, who he was, and how compassionate he was. Because he was trying to hide, he was on the run, he already understood that he will be in trouble with the Romans once John was executed. So he was hiding. He was trying to go away, but he was famous, so he was going as far as he could, and yet still famous. So he was rushing. He was rushing. But when he was called for, he showed up. He answered. He didn't tell her to go away. He didn't tell her, I don't have time. He said, here's a test. Is it worthy for me to risk my life, my hiding time, to help this woman? Like, think that every person that he helps on his way means that he's going to get more and more famous. He already went through all the synagogues, right? Helping people there who needed psychological help. And a lot of people needed psychological help at that time because things were very difficult. And it was clear that the world that the Jewish people knew was falling apart, was breaking. So people were broken. They were depressed. This is why I got emotional when I read it, because it was so clear to me. And you can see the jokes and the Jewish humor that is still the same humor to this day in basically so many sentences here. And it warmed my heart. It really broke my heart as well, to realize that there was a world, our world, that we were too afraid to explore for different reasons. Whether it's because of the sentiment toward Christianity, maybe because it was first century, the biggest trauma that we have went through as a nation, that to this day it's hushed. We break a glass, we remind ourselves that story in grievance, but to actually talk about it as something that was living and not just something that died is something that is the next step for us as a nation, I think. We are independent again. It's a trauma that needs to be healed so that we believe in ourselves that we could be independent. We need the confidence. And the way to get confidence is to understand the time where we were broken in our land. Yeah. Is there anything else I wanted to say here? There are a lot of things that I want to say about Mark and all the stories here. I'm gonna do it one by one. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Please consider supporting me via PayPal, Buy Me Coffee, Patreon, whatever works for you, or even super chat, super thanks comments here on the video. I cannot do it without you, especially now. One of the reasons why I can understand where the gap is at is because I'm working on a project to map the way different cognitions work. So we have a different operating system installed in us, depending on the culture we grew up in. Once you start reading that, the way Jews do, then this story makes perfect sense. And when I, for example, showed that story to my brother on Friday night, Shabbat dinner, I said, why did Jesus help the woman? His intuition was first, I don't know, and then I said, think like a Jew. Put yourself in Jesus's shoes. And he said, because she answered like a Jew. That's why. Was she even a Gentile? Yeah, she was a Gentile. But for a Gentile to answer in a way that is accepting somebody else's axioms without arguing whether they're true or not, and then beating them at their own game, that's rare. That's why not a lot of Gentiles get easily accepted to the inner circles of Jews. But if you know that, if you know this hack, if you understand the cognitive system and the reasoning that Jews use, let me tell you, you don't need to convert. You can infiltrate. Really, you can. All right, thank you for watching. See you in the next Mark story.